Okay, so welcome to the breakout session, the power in telling your story with speaker Laura Weber. We are so glad to have you here. My name is Rachel McKissick Harris, and I am from Think Babies, Michigan with ECIC, and I will be moderating today's session. I will be monitoring questions in the chat, and if you have any issues, you can send me a direct message through the Zoom chat. We ask that everyone stays on mute during the session unless you have a question or to participate in the conversation. This helps to reduce the background noise. We encourage you to be on video if you can, so we can see each other and build community. But if you're more comfortable or must be off video for children and other reasons, we totally understand. If you would like to read the transcript or to see closed caption for this session, please click on the button that says CC/live transcript, then choose show subtitle, and you can hide the subtitles by repeating this process as well. Please share your thoughts, questions, and affirmations, or anything that is particularly interesting to you in the chat or through the reaction buttons. Now let me introduce Laura Weber. For more than 30 years, Laura has been working to enhance the capacity of family-run organizations and has advocated for policies and programs that support the empowerment and inclusion of families and youth. Currently, Laura is the Executive Director of Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, a family organization serving families of children with disabilities and special health care needs throughout North Carolina. Now, I will turn it over to our presenter, Laura, to start the session. Thank you for being here.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. It is a beautiful, beautiful day. Thank you all for joining this session. I know there are many other things you might be doing on your Saturday, but it speaks volumes that you have chosen to join this conference. And I did have the opportunity of participating in the keynote speaker and the second speaker, and it is great information. So thank you. I did get introduced officially, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself since we're talking about parents as leaders telling your story. So I was born and raised in upstate New York, about 60 miles north of the New York City. And I am from a family with 6 other siblings. 5 of those siblings are female. So we had 6 girls and 1 boy. And when you count my mother, there's 7 females and 2 males. My father lived in the house with us, though we rarely saw him because he worked 2 jobs. And I think really he wanted to run away from a bunch of us females. So my mother is an immigrant. She came from Scotland right after World War II. And my father was a meter reader with an electric company, gas and electric company. So that was his day job. And then his night job was he drove taxi cab. And that clearly left my mother 24/7 with 7 kids and no support, given that all of her family was back in Scotland. So today, this session is about using your story as a way to create change in systems, in your child's education, and using your story as a means of helping other families. So unfortunately, we're not going to have an opportunity today to hear all of your stories, although I would love to. But if you would please, now that you've heard a little bit about my story, if you would put in your chat 1 or 2 things about you, right? And of course, now my PowerPoint's not. There you go. So you could put where you were born, where you live now, your child's first name or how many children you have, or the age of your child, or anything else you'd like to tell us about you. So if you would please just quickly put it in chat, and we won't get to all of them, but we will get to know a little bit more about who's with us on this session today. So if you're ready, I think the chat is open.
El chat está abierto. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm the interpreter. They didn't have the Spanish option with this one. So I think I'm going to be interrupting you.
It is okay. You can interrupt me all you want.
So
Remember, I
Marisol,
come
I
from a
just,
family of 7. I don't think I
Right.
ever completed a sentence in my family.
Laura, actually, I just turned it on. I was waiting for Marisol to join because I didn't see you in here. So it is now turned on. So the Spanish interpretation. So Rochelle, if you could give those instructions again, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I sure can. Okay, so welcome everyone. Sorry about my 2-month-old.
That's
so
okay.
this session
Babies are
has-
welcome.
So this session has Spanish interpretation available, and I'm going to invite Marisol to come on and share how to access the Spanish language channel.
Can we see your baby?
Oh, sure. Hold on, let me get my camera on and I'll hold him up for you guys. He's kind of in a tizzy right now. Oh, but here he goes.
Oh, look at the baby. Hello.
Oh. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And Marisol, are you giving instructions? Okay, Rochelle, can we assume the instructions in Spanish have been given?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so we have some really, we have people from Ohio. Bernice is from Ghana, living in Burlington, Salisbury. Monica's from Mexico, and now has 2 children, and in the middle of the pandemic. Melanie, born in Winston-Salem, has 4 kids. Jasmine has a beautiful daughter, Liliana. We have somebody from Arkansas, wonderful. And then 3 children. Nadia was born in East Africa, now living in Raleigh. Welcome, Nadia. And if you can keep your camera on, that would be great. If you can't, we certainly understand. And thank you again for joining this session. And telling your story is about being open, right? About who you are, what your story has been. And if you were in the other session, we learned that our resilience is born through our experiences, and our story comes out of those. And when we think about how people learn generally, when we think about the wisdom of elders, we hear a lot about narrative and storytelling, because stories are very powerful, and they're very powerful ways of communicating information. And they draw upon our emotions, they draw upon, they connect with people in a way that sometimes data and numbers and figures don't, right? So stories are a perfect complement to those numbers and that data, right? They make it real. So thank you for sharing a little bit about who you are. And so this session today is a session that's coming to you both from ECAC, Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, and the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program. Both of our organizations have been very much involved in the framework that was presented earlier during the lobby and in the Early Childhood Leadership Initiative that you heard Christy Suggs and Alexandra talk about. So we are very much connected to those organizations. And for Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, we've been around in North Carolina, probably about 36 years. And our role is to support families with children with disabilities and special health care needs navigate the education system. We also have a focus on helping all families navigate the education system and helping families find and use their voice for change, because change can't happen. It does happen often through policies, but policymakers are often disconnected from what is really happening in the lives of families, particularly when you heard the keynote speaker talk about the poverty level I don't know many lawmakers or policymakers who really get what it's like to raise a family with insufficient financial resources, right? So having families tell their stories actually helps people do a better job of setting policies for families. So the whole saying I saw in the chat earlier, nothing about us without us, is really pretty critical, right? That you making policies and systems in a devoid of what's happening in the real world means we end up with what we have today, right? Some really kind of crazy, like the poverty level being at $24,000, right? We all know that the poverty level, if you got a family of four, $24,000 is really a year is sub-poverty. But having families involved in telling their stories actually helps for better outcomes, right? So today we're going to describe why telling your story is important. And then we're going to talk about lessons, using skills learned to develop and share your unique story, because everyone has a unique story. And then we'll talk about some opportunities in North Carolina that families can use to share their story for change, right? And there's lots of reasons why we share our stories. But today we're going to focus on sharing our stories to create change and to create better systems that serve families. So when we think about our stories, right, there's really no one better qualified to talk about your child than you. And as parents, we know that you know your child and your family best, right? And that parents understand the everyday pleasures and pressures of parenting children, regardless of whether or not you're understanding the circumstances or emotions. We'd like to think that telling your story is always a safe thing to do, but we know in today's world, there's nothing that's always a safe thing to do. So we are really supporting people who say, no, not at this time. No, I can't share my story right now. Okay, so we have what we call a Jamboard, and Rochelle is going to put this link into the chat. So if you could click on this link.
I just loaded it in.
Thank you, Rochelle.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you ought to be able to see the Jamboard. And let me just give you a quick, on the left-hand side of the Jamboard, Rochelle, if you'd go all the way over to the left, and you see the little sticky note, slide down right there, click on that. And if you would type in, Rochelle, just for demonstration purposes, what is one reason why it's important to share your story? Great. And then if you click save. So the Jamboard posts up and then you can hit cancel. There you go. So what it does is just put your answer right on this whiteboard, right? And everyone, your name is not associated with it. So if you can take a moment and just for you, you want to scroll down to the sticky note on the left-hand side. Somebody found the pen, great for you. And if your Jamboard is working, you ought to be able to scroll down on the left-hand side to the sticky note, click it, and then write. Okay, so for those of you for whom the Jamboard is working, can you click on your sticky note? Okay. Okay, so the history doesn't repeat itself. Thank you very much. And then, Rochelle, I'm going to ask if you can Yes, so your story can help someone else who is struggling. That is perfect. Right? How many times have you sat down next to somebody and started chatting and find out that they have imparted their story has actually helped you or imparted some wisdom to you that you were actually able to go and use, right? It is one of the reasons why at Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, we only hire people who have a child with a disability if they're working with families, because having that same background, right? It's almost like finding your tribe, like, oh, I found my people. These are the people who get it, right? And then it helps create a history for your family, which is tremendously important. You know, people need to have a sense of, children have a need to sense of where they're placed in the world. And we heard one of the earlier speakers talk about their identity and their history. So sharing your story is really important for that. And then to help change policies that affect our families. You know, it's a reason why we have people go speak before Congress, or we have people write letters, or people really talk about what their real world experience is, because those are the things that are important in creating policies. All right, so I'm seeing that a lot of people are struggling to open this link. So we're just going to quickly, we have one more. Rochelle, can you make that a little bit bigger? Exactly. We share when we need to seek assistance for the appropriate resources. And I want to hold on that one because that one's very important, right? So often when we're seeking resources for our families, we often have to tell people all the things we don't have, right? No, I don't have enough money. No, I don't have a job. No, I don't have a car. No, I don't have this. No, I don't have this. So when we get to enough no's, right, then we often are given assistance. But that's only a very part of our story, right? The other story is, no, we may not have a job. We may not have enough money. We may not have a car. We may not have this. But what we do have is love, support, care, lots of relationships with people and connections in the community. So telling our stories often gives the other side of the story that's missing when we go to apply for resources, right? And it helps remind us that we are more than what we don't have, that we have to check these boxes for services, right? So it helps us give us the bigger picture of what our families are like and what is happening in our worlds at the moment. And we share our stories to help others that are going through tough times that may have been very similar to the tough times that you have been going through. So super, these are all good reasons to share your stories. And again, it is your story, and when and how you share it is up to you, and to whom you share it is up to you. All right, so thank you, Rochelle. If you wouldn't mind closing that, and I'll share my screen again and head us back to the PowerPoint. So thank you, everyone who was participated in the Jamboard. And for those of you who weren't able to participate, our apologies. Sometimes technology is our friend, and sometimes I can't stand the darn stuff, right? Because it's getting in my way. So thank you very much. So let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. So when you heard about my sharing your story has it has a format, right? So when you think about the very short story I shared with you earlier about who I am, right? People told you about basically my work history, but I told you a little bit about who I am as a person and what has shaped me, right? And so growing up in the family that I grew up in really shaped me in lots of ways, right? I do the work I do now, partially because I saw the struggles my mother went through as although she was married, in essence, she raised 7 children as a single parent for the most part, with no other resources available to her because, so when you heard my story, did it just bring any feelings for you? Because this is what stories should do. It should have a beginning, so who I am, a middle, how I grew up, and an end, why I'm doing what I'm doing now. But it should also bring some feelings to the surface, right? It should help people feel some of what you're going through. And it should be relatable. It should keep your attention. And hopefully you should learn something either about the person or about the situation, or about what's currently happening in the world. And ideally, it should encourage action, deeper thinking, or both. So when you hear even snippets, little pieces of stories, right, you learn something about the person or the situation that you may not have known before. So if you just heard my credentials, right? So yes, I run a nonprofit organization. So I'm an executive director. I have a PhD. I've got all these degrees. But that doesn't really tell you anything about who I am as a person, right? It tells you about accomplishments, which are not related necessarily to who a person is and what drives them in this world. So when we're talking about sharing your story, we're really talking about helping people learn something more about you and why is it important for them to know that. So we know that family involvement is critical, right? We know there's more than 50 years of research that says families being involved in their child's education, and we're going to move that out, being involved in making change in the world. There's more than 50 years of research that proves how effective that is. And what I find very ironic and interesting is, you know, people often complain it's a new flavor of the day. We're always switching. Yet 50 years is not the new flavor of the day. And we still have a hard time truly engaging families in meaningful, authentic ways, right? Because the stories we have in our head about who families aren't necessarily who families are. And the whole role of thinking that we've got to be professionals with degrees that really make any change is just a fallacy. Because when you think about the big changes that have been made in this world, it's often been made by families. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? Harsher driving laws were done by that organization, Mothers by Drunk Driving. The laws that affect children with disabilities were done because families, the clamor, the noise from families was loud enough, families of children with disabilities, that changes were made. And they were telling their stories. Mothers Against Drunk Driving were telling their stories. Mothers Against Gun Violence. And I keep saying mothers, and I know that fathers and men are a very important part of this equation. And at the same time, it is often the mothers who are leading the charge. So we know that throughout history, family involvement is really the thing that has made the difference and really made changes in this world. And the research is there that supports that. So we talked about why your story is important, right? So never underestimate how important the power of those stories is. So if you think about taking those stories to educate, inform the public, other families, educators, we really see that this is the thing that makes the change, right? So the impact is we really have the change as parents and families and people who have lived experience to change systems and policies, and I would say to change the world. But it's how do we use those in a way that really makes the difference? And so I'm going to ask if anybody wants to come off chat And just tell us in a way that you have used your story for making a difference. If you want to put it in the chat, go right ahead. But if you want to come off chat, because this really is about who you are and how you can make a difference in this world, not by your degrees, not by your connections to people in power, but by the thing we all have and we're all grounded in, the story of our lives and the story of what has happened with us. So is there anyone who wants to do a quick share or put something in the chat to help us get a sense of how you have used your story or your family's experience to make a change? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. And anyone brave enough to raise your hand?
Oh, Laura, Bernice put something in the chat. She said, my story about the effect of lack of equity in education in my country led me to become a passionate educator.
Oh, Bernice, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And my sense is you're probably using that story as you are in your education of other people. All right, anybody else? Okay, I can't see everyone. So Rochelle, if you can, see if anybody else has their hand up.
I don't see any hands, but Jasmine put in the chat, helping my friend to navigate through resources offered that resulted in helping her family financial stability.
Excellent. And those are just some of the very clear examples on how using your story can help make a difference in this world. So as we think about technology is not my friend because my screen's not advancing again. Okay, so there are many current opportunities today in North Carolina to learn how to tell your story or to use your story. So we will send out a handout after this that just lists some of the opportunities. But I know there's lots of people on this call because some of the names I now that I can see, I can recognize. If you can just tell us what are some of the opportunities in North Carolina to use your story to make change. You can put it in the chat. You can come off mute because you're probably sick of hearing about me. So you can hear my voice. So we can hear somebody else's voice about how you can use your story or opportunities in North Carolina to use your story to create change. All right, so we're gonna, I'll share some while you're thinking of them, and please do put them in chat. So, if we want to just talk about globally education, right, in North Carolina, there are the PTAs. There are the PTOs. If you're thinking about the education system, we see that regardless of what you think about it. Oh, so what do you mean by use your story? Okay, so the personal story of your family's experiences. That's what we mean about your story. Every family has gone through experiences, whether it is the education of your child, whether it is early intervention services, right? Or the needs that happened to you as you were pregnant, or the experiences your family went through. So when we look at, Amanda says, you can use your story in speaking in front of school boards. So what happened to you and your family in the public education system. And stories don't always have to be stories of woe, right? Stories of things that didn't go well. They can be things that have gone extraordinarily well that you want to share so that other people can learn from that and keep doing what they're doing. Or it can be a story of a negative experience your family encountered. And that is a way that you want things to stop happening that way, right? So your story is your experiences as a family, your experiences as a parent. And so I hope that helps a little bit about really what your story is. So I told you a little bit about my story, right? Which is what brought me to advocating for family involvement, advocating for family support in particular. It was being part of a family that had no real support outside of one lone woman, my mother, who was really trying to navigate a system she didn't understand, she didn't grow up in, and that she didn't have the resources to really make it happen. And part of what helped shaped me is that that doesn't have to be, right? That just really, we could have better systems and supports for family. And so it shaped me in a way that I'm a champion for women. I grew up in a family of 7 women. I experienced what it was like growing up in a family with inadequate resources. And so we can use these stories as a way to make change in the world. So Ms. Richardson, that's what we really think about what your story is. So we have, hey Lee. Lee has said the Family Support Network can offer educational opportunities to share your story and needs. Exactly, and the Family Support Networks, a lot of them have support groups. So going into a support group is a way of kind of shaping your story and hearing the stories of other families, right? The Children's Collaborative offer professional training based on stories parents tell. And then Jasmine personally understands how important it is to get in the special education program at your school if you have a child with learning disabilities. And having an IEP led her to excel and end up getting a scholarship to go to a university. You know, there's just amazing stories that we often don't think are important, but they are important for all the reasons we've listed earlier. And then Ms. Linares, can somebody translate, please? She has a child with cerebral palsy. That's probably as far as I got. So can somebody translate the rest of what Ms. Linares has put in the chat? Can we translate it from Spanish into English, please, so everyone can get the benefit of her comments?
Marisol, are you able to? Laura, she was trying, but I don't know if it's because of the internet. She is trying. I can hear you. Rochelle, can you hear Marisol?
I cannot.
Okay. So we know that Ms. Linares has put in that she is a child with cerebral palsy. And I believe there's something about the medical system and the situation about her child's education classes. And I'm sorry that we can't see what that translation is into English. But thank you very much for putting your comments into the chat. So in North Carolina, there are ways that you can learn how to tell your story. Because remember, if you're using your story for change, it's not necessarily the same story that you would be using. Thank you. She says the system has helped her quite a lot and helped her take early education classes to help him. Thank you very much. That is very helpful. But there are ways to get engaged and ways to get involved in a way to learn how to tell your story. If you have social media, being on social media is one of the ways to learn where all these trainings are happening. I know the early intervention branch does a training on telling your story. At ECAC, we do trainings on how to tell your story and how to get engaged. Because remember, the research that is abundantly clear is that family engagement and family involvement is really what helps children develop, have better educational outcomes, and helps systems really change. But we need systems to hear families. So Jasmine also says another parent's story about receiving services for their child helped her accept her child's speech delay that led to her getting additional assistance with her child. And then Lee says our local children's hospital had an autism parent advisory board to hear suggestions. And your local healthcare providers may have other opportunities. So finding the opportunities in North Carolina, and we will send out a sheet that describes lots of opportunities in North Carolina. One, to learn how to tell your story, but two, ways that you can get involved in using your story to create change. Because at the end of the day, our stories are tremendously important for in many ways, right? They are important to our family, as we heard history for our family history. They are important to schools to know who our family is and who our child is and what our child's needs are. They're important to service providers so that they can see our family as a whole family and not just what that specific service is trying to provide for our family. They're important to share what we heard from the speaker earlier this morning, right? Our stories are important to share with our children. So we help them build resilience and we help them know how to navigate systems. And at the end of the day, we're made up of systems, right? Systems of support, systems that serve our family system. And then we see there's another comment in the chat that's in Spanish. So if somebody would translate that to English so that we all have the benefit of that comment, that would be important. So as we think about telling our stories to create change, or telling our stories to help other families, what are some of the things the questions you have, or the things you want to know about to make that really impactful? And, feel free to come off chat and have a conversation with us, because being able to speak and tell your story verbally is as important as being able to tell it in writing. So we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear from you. So what would compel you to get involved? Why would you want to use your story to create change, and in what arena? So
can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay. Basically, to get involved, my biggest thing would be to help. And I know I have a family member that is dealing with her son's learning disability, and without my story, I feel like she wouldn't have thought for him to, be part of the special education. So that way teachers not label him, as a bad kid or anything. They'll work with him because they understand it's a learning disability, give him extra time, more focus. So I know for that, and for me, my parents worked hard for it. And again, it helped me in the long run because you do have that individual education plan. So, if just in that subject, if that can help someone, I think that's, a great thing.
It is a great thing. So thank you. All right, for others, what would compel you to get involved and want to share your story? So in each of us, there is a burning why, right? So why would you want to? And you came to this session for a reason. So what is the reason that would really help you or want you to get involved and to tell your story?
So Laura, I just want to jump in. We've got that translation now put into the chat. It says, Queenia says, hello, good morning. I believe that the difficulties in my country in terms of work and education made my family look for an opportunity here in North Carolina. I have been starting the process for my son to be accepted in school and that he can start his professional help or therapies, receive professional help or therapies. I have faith that with the help of them, the mothers with their experience, their ideas, their information, we will make progress and positive changes for my son. Faith in autism aid organizations here in North Carolina.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for putting your comments in the chat and for the translation, right?
Yes.
And then is it Guillermo, Ms. Romero, that you'd like to share your story, but you can't speak English very well. And you know, for many people, not being able to speak English very well, it feels like a big barrier. But we do need to hear your story. And it's organizations like conferences like this that provide the translation so you can speak, so you can tell your story and that we can hear your story. But I hope that you're not
Hello.
English very, yes.
Can I share my history?
Yes.
Okay. I'm an immigrant, and since I live in North Carolina, I have learned English with reading connection and GTCC. This has helped my family and my daughter in the school.
Thank you. Is that your family in your picture right there? It's very beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And you know, language is a barrier, and it doesn't have to be a barrier. And I'm thinking right here about this conference here that provides translation, particularly from English to Spanish and Spanish to English, which is so very important, right? And recognizing that all stories are important and all families' voices are important and important enough that translation is a critical function. So just, you know, in the school systems, the schools need to be able to, the schools are required to provide translation because it's very hard to be involved in your child's growth and development and education if you really don't understand what people are saying to you and people can't understand what you are saying to them. So it is your right, particularly in many of the systems today, that translation is provided, and it is your right to ask for translation to be provided and to get information in your child's first language, right? Because what we see so much of the time today in schools is that children are labeled or given labels, or in early childcare systems, children are given labels about disabilities when it isn't a disability, right? It is a language that English may not be their first language. And so being able to ask for those things and expect that they will be provided to you is really pretty important. So thank you very much for sharing that. All right, so Jennifer says we have 3 minutes left. Nicole says, thank you very much. Nicole says, I want to make sure my daughter receives the best education possible. Exactly. And Lourdes says she was orphaned at 7 years old. Now she's a mother of 2 children. And her goal is to take all the necessary education to improve as a mother and provide the support to my children so that they study and get ahead. Thank you very much for sharing all of that in the chat. So we'll send out that handout on all the opportunities. Well, not all, because there are many opportunities, many more opportunities in North Carolina to get involved that we're going to be able to put down on a piece of paper, and more of joining them all the time. And we will include